Every day on their way home from school, the children came to the giant's garden to play. It was a big, beautiful garden with soft grass. 12 peach trees grew in the garden. They bloomed with delicate, pinkish pearl flowers in the spring, and in the fall they bore juicy fruit. Birds sat on the branches of the trees and sang so sweetly that the children dropped their games and listened to their voices. "How good it is for us here," they shouted to each other. One day the giant came home. He went to visit his fellow Cornish ogre and stayed with him for 7 years. In 7 years he had told him everything he could, for he was not a verbose man, and he decided to return to his castle. When he returned home, he saw children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he shouted in a fierce voice, and the children scattered. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant to himself. "That must be clear to everyone, and I will not let anyone but myself play in my own garden." So he enclosed it with a high fence and posted a sign. "Entry is strictly forbidden." That giant was so selfish. Since then, the Po children had nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but it was too dusty and too many hard rocks, and they didn't like it. Now after school they would wander around the high fence and talk about how beautiful the garden was. "How happy we were there," they repeated to each other. Spring came and little flowers and little birds appeared all over the land. Only in the garden of the giant egotist was winter still going on. The birds did not want to sing there because there were no children there, and the trees had forgotten how to bloom. One beautiful flower raised its head above the grass, but when it saw the inscription, it felt so sad for the children that it hid in the ground again and fell asleep. Only Snow and Frost were happy. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they shouted. "We will be here all year round." Snow covered the grass with his broad white cloak, and Frost silvered all the trees. Then they invited the north wind to visit, and it appeared, wrapped in furs, and howled and roared all day long in the garden and tore the caps off the chimneys on the roof. "What a delightful place," he said. "We should invite Grodd to visit us too." And then there was hail. Every day he drummed on the roof of the castle for 3 hours, and so hard that he broke almost all the tiles. And then he ran faster and faster, whirling through the garden as fast as he could. He was dressed in gray, and his breath was like ice. "I can't understand why spring is so late," said the selfish giant, sitting by the window and looking out at his white, cold garden. "I hope the weather will change." But spring didn't come, and neither did summer. Autumn gifted all the gardens with golden fruit, but gave nothing to the giant's garden. "The giant is too selfish," she said. So winter went on in that garden, and the north wind and hail and frost and snow danced between the trees. One morning the giant was lying in his bed, and suddenly he heard wonderful music. It sounded so sweet that he wondered if the king's musicians were passing by the castle. It was a little bird, and it was singing under his window. But he had not heard songbirds in his garden for so long that this music seemed to him the most beautiful music in the world. Soon the Grodd stopped dancing over his head, and the nasty wind stopped its roar, and a sweet fragrance reached him through the open window. "At last spring seems to have come," said the giant. and jumping out of bed he looked out into the garden. What did he see? He saw a startling sight. Through a small hole in the wall, the children had got into the garden and were sitting on the branches of the trees. There was a little child sitting in each tree. And the trees were so happy to see the children return that they were immediately covered with flowers, and their branches swayed gently over the little ones' heads. Birds were flitting and chirping everywhere, and the flowers were peering out of the green grass and laughing. It was a beautiful picture. Only in one corner did winter still reign. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and there stood a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach the branches and only walked around the tree, crying bitterly. The poultry was still covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was raging and roaring over it. "Get in, little one," said the tree, and ducked its branches as low as possible to him. But the boy was still a babe. And the giant's heart softened when he saw it. "How selfish I have been," said the giant. "Now I understand why the spring didn't come here. I will put that pole up a tree, and then I will tear down that fence, and the children in my garden will have fun forever." He was really very remorseful about what he had done. And so he cautiously descended the stairs, quietly opened the front door, and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they all ran away, and once again winter came to the garden. Only the little boy did not run away, because his eyes were full of tears, and he did not notice the giant. And the giant crept up behind him, gently lifted him up with his hand and put him on the tree. And the tree was at once covered with flowers, and the birds flew to it and began to sing their songs. And the little boy stretched out his arms and put his arms around the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, seeing that the giant was no longer evil, ran back, and spring came with them. "Now this is your garden, my dear children," said the giant, and taking a huge axe, he tore down the fence. At noon people went to the market and found the giant playing with the children in a beautiful garden like they had never seen before. They played all day, and in the evening they came to the giant to say goodbye. "But where is your little friend?" asked the giant, "the boy whom I had put in the tree. He loved him most of all, because he kissed him." "We don't know," answered the children. "He's gone somewhere." "Tell him to come here tomorrow," said the giant. But the children said they did not know where he lived, and that they had never seen him before. Every day after school the children came to play with the giant, but not once did the little boy, whom the giant had grown fond of, show up. With all the children the giant was affectionate, but he longed for his first little friend, and often talked about him. "How I wish I could see him," Giant said more than once. The years passed, and the giant grew old and weak. He could no longer play, but only sat in a huge chair, and watched the fun of children, and admired his garden. "I have many beautiful flowers," he said, "but the most beautiful flowers are the children." One winter morning he looked out of the window while getting dressed. By now he no longer hated winter, because he knew that in the season spring is only napping and flowers are resting. Suddenly he began to wipe his eyes with wonder and kept looking and looking. And indeed he saw a wonderful sight. In the farthest corner of the garden stood a tree covered entirely with beautiful white flowers. Its branches were golden, and on them hung silver fruits, and under the tree stood a little boy, the very one he had fallen in love with. In great joy, the giant ran down and rushed into the garden. Right through the grass he ran towards the child. And when he came very close, his face turned red with anger, and he said, "Who dared to hurt you?" For the child had the wounds of 2 nails in the palms of his hands, and the wounds of 2 nails in his feet. "Who dared to wound you?" shouted the giant again. "Tell me, and I will take my sword and go and kill him." "Oh, no," answered the child, "for these are the wounds of love." "Who art thou, then?" said the giant, and a strange terror came upon him, and he knelt down before the little child. And the child smiled at the giant and said to him, "Once you let me play in your garden. Today you will go with me to my garden, and my garden is heaven." And when the children came running into the garden after school, they saw that the giant was lying dead under a tree, and the tree was all white and blue.